Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of the Craig Laforest Show. I'm coming direct from Sydney, Australia, and I will be your host today. Tonight, Richard Lighthouse from Targeted Justice will be joining us to discuss weaponized cell towers. Richard, welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you for having me on your show. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I just thought we'd hit it off. I've got a lot of history here with regard to V2K technology and direct energy weapons. If you'd like to perhaps start with any questions you may have, and I'll be happy to respond to those.
Okay, yeah, I do have one important question that I wanted to ask. Who has the funny accent? Is that you or me?
Well, it's a combination. I think sometimes I hear myself and I think, wow, that's a really interesting accent. Where did that come from? Because I lived in the United States for 28 years, so I've got a little bit of American in there, and my mother was so I do my best between all of them. As I tell a lot of people, I can speak 3 languages, which is American and New Zealand and Australian, and a little bit of French as well. I can get by with French, but yeah, it's good old Aussie dialect, I think.
Okay. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about, because there's a few areas where we get a lot of questions, and we have some diagrams on our website that are very helpful. And to try to explain that in words would be very difficult, and it is. You really have to lay it out in a diagram. And the very first diagram we have on our homepage is how the U.S. Space Force tracks everyone. And I've discussed this in other interviews, but really the top back part of your head, where most people have a little calic, that's where they actually bounce microwave pulses off your head. And everybody that I've tested has that pulse. I have learned to use the knuckles in my hand. I can actually feel the microwave pulses from both satellites and cell towers, and I've taught other TIs how to do that. So I can move my hand around in 360 degrees, and I can tell which cell towers, which direction is a weaponized cell tower. I can feel it literally in my knuckles, and it's somewhat subtle, but once you know what you're looking for, most TIs can find it. And I recommend TIs learn how to do that, because it convinces you very quickly that you're being continuously attacked and tracked by cell towers all around you. But so what the Space Force does in this diagram is I'll refer to it as the satellite tracking diagram. And the Lockheed Corporation it has started in 2016, started launching what they call the GPS-3 tracking satellites. We've actually have pictures of these on the ground while they're being assembled, and these things are monsters. They're very large satellites. You can't really tell when you see a diagram or a pictorial of it in orbit, but these things are enormous. And it's basically, if you can imagine this, a satellite it's a giant fuel tank on the inside, and on the outside is a lot of electronics and batteries and a solar array, and weapons are mounted also on the outside. Typically, those satellites that are launched and operated by the U.S. Space Force, generally all of them that are launched have weapons on them. In fact, we found references on the old Air Force Space Command website where they're describing high-ranking officers that are assigned to a weather satellite as being chief weapons and tactics officers for a weather satellite. So it's very clear that anything that's launched by the Air Force and Space Force has weapons on it. It's very unfortunate that things have to be weaponized like that. But it also makes it much easier for us to track down who is responsible. So in this diagram, it's basically divided into 1, 2, 3, 4. One, you see where they use the microwave beam coming down. It's a scalar beam that can penetrate buildings, and it's a fairly narrow frequency range, 3200 to 3750 megahertz that signal is bounced off your head and returned to the satellite. And step two, it relays those GPS coordinates to Schriever Air Force Base through a network of what are called tracking and data relay satellites. In fact, there's a number of several different constellations that forward those signals all around the world. And from Schriever, it goes to a cell tower. From a cell tower, it's got your updated coordinates, and it can aim directly at just those coordinates. It doesn't need to see you. And it can hit you with subliminal messages, create tinnitus, create V2K, and create painful attacks, very, very literally. So, the diagram is somewhat simplified or oversimplified, but I had to try to compress a lot into that one diagram. But it gives people a general idea, if they can follow that, as to how the technology is being used. If that makes sense.
I saw that this morning, and it's interesting because as you're aware, I just recently came back from an overseas trip. I went to Brussels for a demonstration we had there against V2K technology, direct microwave energy weaponry being used on innocent people. And I was able, prior and after the demonstration and the conference we had up there, I was able to travel to Greenland and Iceland and up to the northern tip of the world, up to Honningsvåg in Norway. And a lot of the time we didn't have Wi-Fi on board the ship. And so they were using military satellites to hit me anywhere in the world with the most disgusting language, and also with the direct energy. I was being burnt along the way. So it's very interesting that we have a military who is able, and people who are able to use these satellites on people, and who is allowing that to happen. Who are the people behind that, allowing people to use such disgusting language and to be using it on innocent people?
I agree. It is disturbing, Craig. We think we've tracked down the right organizations that are involved. We have a lot of compelling evidence to suggest the CIA is funding it. It's certainly part of the MK Ultra program that never went away. Senator Frank Church tried to shut it down with the Church Committee hearings in the 1970s. And although many people got scolded and chastised, but there were no actual repercussions for anybody involved in the program. And grossly illegal. They simply changed the names and moved the funding to a different department and kept going. And we are in touch with a number of people that have a long history of research with the MK Ultra program. So we have quite a bit of knowledge base that we built up, some of which is available on our website. Excellent.
It's an amazing website. In addition to the one that we have a lot of similarities between the eControl website and the Target Adjusted website. It's wonderful, providing information to people who don't understand this technology, people who have discarded their family members who are hearing things and are being burnt through the transmissions. So I really appreciate the work that you've done in developing your wonderful website.
Thank you. Yeah, we had a lot of help. There was a lot of volunteers, a lot of volunteer hours put into that. So yeah, we're proud to help people. We're overwhelmed, quite frankly, with the volume since the lawsuit was filed. We're overwhelmed with the volume of email. We tend to be fairly far behind on the email. Our volunteers try to keep up, and we're a little stretched at the limit. So folks that are sending in emails to T-Justice 2, please be patient. We will get to your emails, and we will try to get you a response. So please be patient.
Okay, so I just wonder if there are any questions you would like to ask me. I'm obviously new to this, setting up this new show in Australia. We have about 10 people who are struggling at the moment with V2K and directed energy weapons throughout Australia, people who have been tortured every single day like me, but are just wonderful in their ability to talk about this. So I don't know if you have anything that you'd directly like to ask me so that we could share that with the people who are listening today.
Well, you bring up a good point. I think the listeners would be very curious to hear, since you spent time both in the U.S. and Australia. Did you sense a difference in the type of targeting? Was the gang stalking different? Do they use the weapons differently to a greater extent? What is your perception?
Yeah, my perception is I was aware. I moved back I was in Los Angeles from 1983 to 2011. So I've been back for 12 years, and I was aware of it as soon as I walked in the front door of my condo, when they said to me, don't just think because you've left Los Angeles, we are going to stop using you. And I recognized from that point on, I had voices in the background during my time in Los Angeles, and I just put it down to my own thoughts. They weren't vocal as such, but I could sense the subliminal thoughts that were coming through and the voices very quietly coming through. And I could tell from my own God-given mind the difference between what was coming in from somewhere and what I was generating as part of my own brain. So there are no differences whatsoever. I'm tortured every single day. In fact, similarly to many people out there, I'm bombarded 24/7. I'm woken in the middle of the evening. I walk the streets to go to get lunch or dinner, and I am absolutely bombarded with the voices commenting, because obviously we transmit through our eyes as well. So I'm attacked frequently with the most disgusting language and the burning. And that's what I'm finding in Australia. I've had a gentleman recently who's just an intellect, brilliant guy, and he called me while I was on board the ship, contacted me on board the ship, and said, I'd like to talk to you when you get back to Australia. And he said, I spoke to him 2 weeks ago, and he said, look, I've been having these words come into my head for a long time. And I've finally, after listening to you, Craig, and what's being said on targeted individuals and at Ikator, I referred him to some sites. He said, now I understand that it's not me. These are produced by some either an Australian entity or somewhere else in the world, which are hitting me. So that's the good part of what we are doing here in Australia. I'm speaking about it as much as I can. I've got nothing to lose. I'm retired now, and I just have to keep focused on trying to help future generations, because we need to stop this.
Yeah, I agree. I'm sorry you're going through that, Craig. I know it's difficult. I do not have the V2K, but I sympathize with the folks that do. I know that's difficult. Excuse me. So another question I had thought of is, to what extent do you think, are you familiar with the Five Eyes agreement? Have you heard that term?
I wasn't familiar. I did a little bit of research on it, and I really can't make a comment about it. If people want to Google Five Eyes, they'll find the information, but I don't have a lot of information on that, unfortunately. We don't have a history here in Australia, as you do, with the FBI making a mess of themselves and the CIA making a mess of themselves in so many respects. We don't have a history of that in Australia. We really in the initial stages of understanding what V2K is and what directed energy weapons are. And as I said, we have 10 people that I would talk to in Australia who are very clear about what they're going through and are out in the media as much as they possibly can.
Yeah, it's for the listeners out there, the Five Eyes was an agreement that was set up quite a while, decades ago, that involved the United States, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the UK. And these five were to share some of the most top secret intelligence information, share openly amongst themselves. And I think I've heard this spoken many times before, that the reason for this intelligence sharing was the technology that was discovered and made operational by the U.S. from the Echelon program. And you may have heard that program as well, but basically it's a listening, the ability to listen and amplify vocals and listen to messages and content from great distances. And they developed electronics techniques that allowed them to listen from great distances, so that clearly your risk of exposure is very low. And based on that Echelon technology, they decided it would behoove them to start sharing that, but also to capture that intelligence in all these other countries. And so it's unfortunately part the beginning of the real surveillance state and part of the expanding deep state. And I encourage folks to go and look up the Echelon program and the Five Eyes program and how that is continuing to expand. We're seeing the United Nations and NATO talking about growing Five Eyes to 9 eyes or 11 eyes, and in many ways they've already effectively done that, because those secret agreements are already in place and that sharing is already occurring. They're just not calling it a new name. So there's a number of countries that are already working at that same level of intelligence sharing: Germany, France, Brussels, in Belgium. So anyway, there's plenty of research out there that folks can do that are interested in trying to get a better background of how this initial program expanded to a global surveillance network. And I encourage folks to look that up.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. As you may know, I'm a good friend of the scientist, Dr. Robert Duncan, who is ex-CIA and is now a whistleblower. And he stepped away from it about 22 years ago because his victims eventually became us, and he wanted to do the right thing. And he's identified that there are at least 26 ways to manipulate the human nervous system in the brain. He stated, I'm just going to read some notes here, this is a global phenomenon. There is nowhere on Earth you can escape. The full spectrum of electromagnetic energy and physics are combined in this. From the ground, wavelengths travel through the ionosphere, bounce off of them and the Earth ground. We are bathed in a natural magnetic field of Earth. With those two things, you have a nuclear magnetic resonance machine. Surveillance is available when integrating with satellites. This technology should have been used to help the world of brain problems. However, it's out of control because wars have proven that one country has to be stronger and wiser than another. That is, to many people, the priority. And now we have millions of people who are being used to help this priority, and mental illness has been created in healthy people. It's menticide and genocide.
Yeah, that's very unfortunate truth about our modern society. And I applaud Mr. Duncan for coming forward. That took a lot of courage. And I hope that he will continue to speak out for the TI community.
Yeah, he's wonderful. He came down to Sydney in January this year. And for me personally, it was an amazing experience because it was the first time we'd had somebody come down to Australia and talk about this openly. And I held a discussion with him in front of a live audience in my home. And we just hit it off, started very slowly, and we went for about an hour and 15 minutes. And the audience was absolutely stunned. The questions that they asked were so relevant to what I was going through. There was no judgment at all. They were very open-minded. So I saw that as an introduction to what we need to do in Australia, because we don't have the support in Australia through the media, through doctors. Doctors refer us to immediately call us psychotic or sick people. I've gone through the whole process of as many people have done. So it was wonderful to have him down here. And this cybernetic warfare is so outrageous. The fact that the US is still attacking anyone who falls under their want of someone special, they make many victims isolated and use them for this technology still.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate that you're correct. The technology could be used for so many beneficial purposes, and it's been twisted into something that's very harmful.
Mm, mm. And when you think of the magnitude of this, the 6 million people we estimate around the world, you've got 400,000 potentially cases in the United States, and you're representing 18 people in this lawsuit. But when you think about 6 million people around the world who are going through this hell, you've got to consider, why would people still insist on targeting the same people every single day? Because we're not going to stop talking about this. We're going to keep fighting this. We have to, for future generations.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Craig. Certainly the people that designed the architecture for the program could probably answer that, but it is baffling, some of the aspects of the program. I think it certainly functionally becomes a discouragement to people that are on the inside with top secret clearances that might be considering blowing the whistle, and they remind them either casually or regularly that, oh, by the way, you know, this program here, we reserve that specially for whistleblowers.
Mm.
And so I think in one sense the program has been deliberately leaked a little bit, certainly to the intelligence community. We saw William Burns, director of the CIA, did a long interview not too long ago with the CIA's take on Havana syndrome, and it was a 60-minute special. And for those that don't know, William Burns is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, as is Dick Cheney, and a number of key people that work with the targeted individual program on a regular basis. So Burns is intimately familiar with it. He's not being truthful, and neither is Dick Cheney. And they both get their marching orders from the Council on Foreign Relations. So we know where the CIA gets its orders from, and it's not the president. Let's talk about cell towers and beamforming a little bit.
Well, I'll share with you, what I saw yesterday. I happened to be driving north of Sydney to a suburb called Brookvale, where I went to a shop to look for something from my home, and I was overwhelmed. I haven't driven up to that part of Sydney in many years, in fact, and every time I came around a corner, I could see these high-rise cell towers beaming out, and they were not only ugly, but to the point of what we are going through, it made me once again recognize the damage that we are doing to ourselves and future generations from these towers. Can you provide me with any information about your understanding of these, Richard?
Sure, Craig, that's a great question. We've got a number of things we're doing at Targeted Justice in terms of research and trying to better understand how these cell towers are being used and weaponized. We've got a program or a project, I guess, that we're asking all of our members to participate in. Here in the United States, there's a website called antennasearch.com, and you can go into this website and type in your address or just a zip code, and it will pull up all of the licensed permits that went through the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, and allow them to either erect a cell tower or place a weaponized panel array on top of a building. Most folks are looking for these towers, but it turns out that many of these weaponized panel arrays are on the top of buildings. So we encourage you to be aware of that and look for them. What we're also finding recently is many of them are unlicensed when there's, the law is very clear that these large towers are supposed to be licensed. I came across one just last week where we drove up, and there's a nice little sign right on the front that says, there's no permit required, no FCC permit is required for this cell tower. And I went, this thing was enormous, clearly over 100 feet tall, and had multiple levels in it. And I was like, I know there is no way that this cell tower and what it's doing is exempt from permitting. So that's one of the things we're trying to look into is how are these guys
This is in one of the suburbs near where you live.
Yes, this was in a suburb outside of Houston, and of course we've got these towers, and they're usually fenced off all around town, and so it's one of the things we're looking into. We're trying to understand how are they getting around some of the licensing requirements, the permitting requirements. What are they doing and telling the FCC, and what are they not telling? And so this is actually a fairly large effort. We've got to look for the patterns. We've got to study the cell towers that are in our area, and we can certainly pick out the ones that are weaponized. The cell towers that are weaponized are the ones that involve generally 4-panel antennas. And so we've got a diagram, in fact, on our homepage that's it's listed as figure M-1, and it shows how the microwave beam is formed by using four panel antennas, typically using 4-panel antennas. And the Ericsson Corporation filed for this patent back in 2016. Well, it turns out they've got a long history of filing beamforming type patents going back 10, 15 years prior to that. And in the latest patent that they filed for references those prior patents. So it's not simply this networking that they're now doing between cell towers to form a beam. They're also referencing the prior patents on the beam forming that go back many years. So for those that are interested in the technology, we encourage you to read it. There's a little bit of mathematics involved to describe how the technology works. If you want to wade through that, but we clearly know which patents were filed. We know which ones they're using. We've tracked down more than a dozen manufacturers that are making these integrated circuits that are literally beamforming chips. And these are used in these cell towers to control the panel antennas and get them to form these nice little perfect microwave beams, just like a laser beam. And this is readily available. It's amazing that all of this classified type activity is happening using patents that are readily available to the public and has been hidden for many years. Targeted Justice was certainly one of the first organizations to expose the patents and the technology that's involved, and we try to share that openly on our website and in our discussions and in our newsletter as well. Right next to that diagram is called Figure PA, and we had put this out probably back in 2021 when we first started talking about the panel antennas and how they are used as a weapon. There was, at the time, I remember an interview that was done with an insider that I believe worked for MI5 or MI6 over in the UK, and he was describing his briefing in a classified meeting where he said cell towers are basically a globally distributed weapon system, and they have access to all of those towers, and they can be used as a weapon system.
I think, Richard, you're talking about the physicist Dr. Barry Trower, perhaps.
Yeah, yes, he has certainly been very vocal, and we very much appreciate his expertise and his courage in coming forward.
Yeah, we're working with him with the law case that we have in Brussels. An amazing man, another wonderful whistleblower who created this technology in the United Kingdom and is now speaking out about it publicly. And he's been so helpful for us in our ongoing case, the case we're trying to build in Belgium. And he was, as you say, he was with MI5. And he's stated in an interview that we had with him that in 2 generations' time, 1 out of 8 children will be born healthy. The rest will be born with some form of handicap, including cancer, which is so dramatic when you think about it. We won't be around. And these children today, as we see them walking around the streets with their phones and not having the skills that we have to communicate, they're on their phones all the time. And we're losing that essence. Communication has changed so dramatically over the years. I remember I read something about what Russia was doing with some of the employees in 1976, I believe it was, in Moscow, and they used microwaves on their employees in the console in Moscow, and a lot ended up with cancer. And now we have the Havana syndrome, which is not any different as Dr. Len Baer is going through, and thank God for Len and the work that he does. The work that Len is going through with the Havana syndrome. But what is pride in one's country these days when the scientists and the governments are using technology on innocent people?
Yes,
it's outrageous.
I agree. It is outrageous, and Targeted Justice and ICATR and a number of other groups are working very hard to expose this and shut it down. So,
you mentioned a website, Richard. Could you give me the details on that for our listeners, please? There was a website that you mentioned talking about the cell towers.
Yes, and antennasearch.com is the one that we use, and there are other ones as well, that attempts to get data from the FCC, particularly about licensed cell tower sites, and many of them are related to TV transmitters and things like that, radio transmitters that are used on a railroad track. You'll see those listed on there. That's not what we're concerned about. What we're concerned about is the panel arrays that are used as a weaponized system, and those are generally the tall rectangular panels that you'll see lined up. We've got pictures of a number of them on our homepage, and the way the technology works is if you use just a single panel antenna, and you can't really do any beamforming with it. It's not set up to do that. But if you combine two panel antennas, you start to get more definition and directionality with what. So with two antennas, you can create a single. You can't call it a beam. It's just really sort of a directionality starts to take shape. Then when you add a third panel antenna, it becomes more directional, but it's also what I would call sloppy. You can see that lobes are forming that are basically wasted energy because it's not being directed in the direction that you want. But by the time you add that fourth panel antenna, you get very clear, sharp laser beam type focus. There's very little waste in what we call side lobes. So it becomes a very effective beam forming panel array. And we don't know if this was experimentally found or if it was mathematically determined, but either way, they've been using it for many years. And the cell tower companies, the operators such as Verizon and T-Mobile and AT&T will tell you that they need beam forming because there's some guy that's 5 miles away from the nearest tower and it's raining and disrupting the signal. And so they're going to create a little microwave beam to make sure that he gets a good cell phone call. And we're going, yeah, that's 99% of the time, that's not the problem. The problem is it's being used for beamforming, for tracking and attacking. And that's the whole purpose. And so we've got a comprehensive, well, I should say some guidelines that we're suggesting from Targeted Justice. One, we want to see the 4 panels reduced. We'll never see more than 3 panels, so you don't get that nice clean beam that can be used on somebody. We want to see all cell towers supposed to reduce down to non-weaponized, okay? We want to see these beamforming circuits removed from all cell towers. And we want to see, the third thing we want to see is these 60 gigahertz that are called frequency multipliers. They're about a shoebox sized device that's used to amplify and create a harmonic for an incoming circuit. For example, a 30 gigahertz signal can be harmonically amplified to a 60 gigahertz signal. And what we found in the research shows that when your chest is attacked with a 60 gigahertz signal, the oxygen atoms are vibrated in such a way that your lungs cannot absorb them, and you suffocate to death. And we've shown very clearly, and we've seen a number of doctors and nurses that saw this very early in the COVID pandemic, that people were dying, particularly in the ventilators. And the doctor said, these people are not dying, they're suffocating. It's they sit there and breathe, and yet they're not getting any oxygen. What's wrong? They're suffocating because the molecules in their lungs are not being allowed to be absorbed, and it's this unique frequency that does that to oxygen.
Yeah, it's all about these frequencies, unfortunately, and it's where we see the burns on so many people because it literally boils the oxygen, the liquid inside the cells on the outer layer of the skin. And we've all seen these pictures. I have them as well constantly. I've got scars on my body from these marks, and they even tell me where they're going to burn me, and the burn continues to happen. It's really fascinating, and you're brilliant in bringing this information to us in this part of the world, which will be shared, as we talked about earlier on, with so many people in our area. Richard, I'm also familiar with the fact that the vets who came back from some of the wars, there seems to be, I can remember living in Los Angeles, and every second commercial on TV was about, if you suffer from this or you suffer from this, please take this pill and talk to your doctor about this. And I'm stunned and appalled that what happened with the vets coming back, and many of them did not see battle, did not go into any armed battle, but they came back with such anxiety and depression, and the medical doctors would provide them with psychotropic drugs, including Zoloft, Seroquel, Xanax, Saprina, Paxil, Prozac. The list went on and on and on, and now we have so many of the vets who are trying to take care of the United States, to take care of the enemies who are outside the United States. But you've got this civil war happening in the United States where the government and the CIA and the FBI, whoever is behind this, are not protecting the people, and they're not protecting the vets who are trying to protect the people.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate circumstance, Craig. I echo that statement as well. I think we're seeing a number of things happening, both culturally and politically. And Australia and the United States share many aspects of those politics and geopolitics in common, not just because they're connected through five eyes, but because we have a common heritage and history, and our political system and our judicial systems are set up somewhat similar. And so we're seeing both of those things being rolled out at an accelerated pace. There's countries all over the world that are not experiencing this sort of political gamesmanship and masterminding. So I think that it behooves us to pay attention to these the political gamesmanship that we're seeing, particularly from the deep state. There are certainly political parties that are very aligned with the deep state political parties in the United States. And so we see some of the same language and issues and censorship happening simultaneously. I'm not sure that answers your question, but I see those common elements between our two countries.
Yeah. We've just got this new arrangement with the nuclear submarines being purchased, and when I heard this news, I was angry because the relationship we used to have with the United States and New Zealand, particularly during World War I, we had the pact of Australian New Zealand Army Corps, which was both New Zealand and Australia were involved in protecting under the doctrine of the United Kingdom. And there's a separate argument as to whether we want to be a republic or not, still governed by the United Kingdom. But we used to have a great relationship with the United States, with the ANZUS Treaty between Australia, New Zealand, and the US. And I find it such a juxtaposition of where we are now, that each country has this problem going on with V2K technology and direct energy weapons, and we still have governments who can't come together to recognize that this is happening on our own citizens. and that there are certain factions who are involved in doing this to people. And I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know. We have a lot of people in Australia who are fed up of being governed, as I said, by the United Kingdom and want a republic. We were once a very independent country. We are very independent in our love and of Australia. We're very passionate about our country. But we're finding now, and particularly because of my involvement with this, I'm just frustrated that the United States, which was once we held as Australians, we thought this is the most wonderful country. Once we traveled to Europe and saw our ancestors in the United Kingdom, the big dream was to go to the United States. But having lived there for 28 years, I've come back very tarnished by the whole experience and what is going on now with civil rights and human rights in the United States. So I just wanted to make that point in terms of what I'm feeling and what a lot of people in Australia are feeling with our relationship with the United States.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, is what is the general perception of the public there? Do they feel like the United States is misguided and leading a misguided effort, or do the Australians believe that they're on their own ship and can guide it the way that they want?
Yeah, I think a lot of the older people would still like to have the United Kingdom, that the monarch system is still there. Unfortunately, I don't see the return on the investment in the monarchy. I don't understand it. I don't respect it. I see so many people struggling around the world. I've done a lot of work with children, I've done foster work on weekends with children and volunteered in hospitals, and I see 21,000 children dying unnecessarily every single day for lack of food or just basic water. I've just been up the west coast of Africa, and on a ship from Cape Town up to Barcelona, and when you see what they're struggling with, it's outrageous. Absolutely, the money we spend via NATO to go to these planets and stars and the moon, and it's incredible, the billions of dollars that's wasted while we're not looking after each other on Earth. Why are we going to colonize other places around the world? And I think that's the belief of most Australians. We're struggling at the moment. We've got an economic disaster down here where people can't afford homes. Everybody's got to look after their pennies at the moment. So I think in answer to your question, Australians are very wary of, they look at the history and they're wary of what's happened from the United States and from the United Kingdom and where they are at present. And with the new technology happening, we're going to have a very big problem in the future if we don't have children who are taught subjects which are relevant to their single, their single purpose in life, their ability to develop their own brains. They don't want to be computerized by chips in their brain, that they literally can sit back and say, I don't need to research this myself. I can rely on a computer. I believe that most Australians now are getting fed up with the relationship that we have with the United States, and we look at it, and it's outrageous what's happening with human rights and the civil war, which has not finished. I believe, between the black and white and the Mexican population, what a certain president did with the Mexicans is absolutely a conflict in my mind. I think a lot of people's minds.
How would you describe the relationship between, for example, do you know any targeted individuals in New Zealand or Malaysia or the Philippines? Is there much communication there right now?
I have one gentleman in New Zealand who I'm in contact with, and he really is marketing what's going on with being a targeted individual. There's a lady I know in Thailand who is also going through a very strong-willed woman, and her family has been targeted very heavily. But slowly it's happening. Slowly we're hearing about people who are being targeted through this. The 10 people that I know in Australia are heavily targeted, and there are certain factions, certain groups of people who are being used. I happen to be a gay man, and I know that the LGBTQI plus group of people have been used because we are single people. I know that 60% of the targets around the world are single ladies and 40% are men. I have two friends who are trans ladies who have been targeted. So it seems to be very well thought of as to who they're going to use in this technology.
What do you know off the top of your head the percentage of the 10, or do they all have V2K?
Yes, of the 10, I would say seven have V2K.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's very similar to the statistics we did back in 2018. We found the number was so precise, it was almost alarming. I believe it came out 66.2% of our membership at that time, and that was out of 700 and something members that had filled out our survey. 66.2% had the V2K, and that is so close to being a perfect 2/3. That's done by design. That wasn't an accident.
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting though. Is there a connection between the 10, or do you have an informal group, or are you communicating together?
I am communicating. We have 4 of us are communicating. One of the ladies was actually a nurse in the Silicon Valley. She's an Australian lady, worked in the Silicon Valley, and she had people coming into the hospital who were saying, I'm hearing voices and I'm getting burns, and they were passed off as being delusional, which is a typical situation, we know. And she said to herself, my God, these people are really sick. And she came back to Australia. She is now targeted and speaks vocally. She's just very open about it. And she came along to the discussion we had with Dr. Robert Duncan in January this year. And so I've got 5 people that I could talk to about this. One gentleman recently, 3 weeks ago, who'd been following me around while I was overseas and wanted to talk to me. A brilliant man, a speaker in many fields, and he is targeted and has V2K. So I feel blessed that I've been able to provide him with the information that he now recognizes he's not a delusional man. He's not a crazy man. He's an articulate man. He works very well. He gives back. He's a great member of society.
Well, we certainly want to see better collaboration. We want to see many of these folks are certainly underrepresented and don't have a voice in the TI community. It's difficult for us to reach them. We know we've got information out there on social media, and yet the visitation we get on our website and the IP addresses that give away where somebody is coming from generally leads us to believe that 85% of our traffic is from the United States, and that doesn't make sense, because we certainly know that countries like Brazil and India and China have larger populations, and statistically should make up a much larger percent of our readers and viewers. And so we're trying to understand, is access being blocked? Are these people unaware that these groups exist? Are they doing something to control or suppress the dissemination of that information?
I find my phone is hacked all the time. My computer is hacked all the time. I can be walking down the street and I'm told directly into my head, you've got a message coming through and your phone is going to wobble in the next few seconds. And sure enough, that's what happens. So it's even in the media, Facebook, I go into some of the posts and I'm very open about everything, because I've got nothing to lose here. I'm only trying to protect not only myself and so many of the TIs now, but future generations. We need to do that. So I go into Facebook, and it's funny because some of the posts that people put up, I make a comment and I go back a few hours later and the comment's been taken out, even though it's a very understanding comment about what that person is going through. Or I go in and I've already seen some of the posts there and there's a like or a heart there. So all of that is monitored, and I'm told that by by the perpetrators of this crime. So yeah, there's the democracy has pretty well gone in that regard. There's nothing that I do which is not available to these people.
I'm sorry to hear that, Craig. I know that's got to be challenging.
Well, we're all going through it. It just makes me stronger in my love of a higher power. I'm a very spiritual person. I believe I'm here for a certain reason. I did not expect to go through this, and I'm passionate about the work that I do in trying to stop this for future generations. And I'm just passionate about my soul. And these are soulless people who are doing this to us, who sit around all day and comment about the way we look or the way that person looks. It's mind blowing. I don't want to use the word mind blowing. It's a game they play. They tell me it's a game. What kind of person has the ability to connect through satellite? Who allows that to happen using a military satellite or some other satellite? As I mentioned, I've been to Antarctica. I've been to the North Cape, and when we don't have Wi-Fi on board the ship, I am tortured with this. I hear very clear voices, and I have very clear burns on my body from the transmissions. So the more I speak out, unfortunately, to try and even help the perpetrators and their children and grandchildren in the future, the more I seem to be tortured. But I will continue to speak out about this, as we all are.
I sympathize with you, Craig. I know that's difficult, and bravo for your courage and your fortitude to get the message out, because there's clearly many TIs that have succumbed to the program, and they don't take advantage of their free speech. They don't take advantage of their opportunities to contact legislators, hand out flyers. There's so many things that every TI can do.
Yeah, we're very limited here. The number of cases I've heard of people speaking out to their doctors. Obviously, we learn, and I've learned through the process, you don't talk to a doctor about it because they either know what's going on, and most of them do know what's going on, and they don't want to get involved, and some of them may think they're going to become the next victim if they do that. However, I met a neurologist on board, neurosurgeon rather, on board one of the ships I was on recently, and I've traveled with him on another cruise, and he said to me, I've expressed this whole situation to him, and he had done the research on it also, and he came back to me. He said, "You know what, Craig? It's interesting. This I really respect the fact that you're going through this, and I understand this technology." And I said, "So what happens if somebody comes in who is saying that they're hearing voices or they're getting burnt through the body? Do you go then, as part of the exercise, when you're looking at X-rays or going through a MRI, do you look for something other than a tumor?" And he said, "No, but what we do see in those X-rays, what we call LFOs, light foreign objects, and we won't go into the brain to find out what those are. Typically, they are very small, granular formed size implants or chips which attach themselves to the skull, and calcification happens, grows over these." So he said, we actually see them, and it was amazing. His wife was with him, and I said, "So we have doctors, ENT specialists, ear, nose, and throat specialists, and we have surgeons who are looking at this and saying, okay, I could be, if approached by the right person, could they perhaps being paid under the table?" And he said, "Look, I know surgeons who would do that." And his wife, lovely lady, she jumped in and just said, "Oh, look, I could give you names of surgeons who would do that under the table." And I thought, what hope is there? What hope is there? So I might be one of those children of the early MK Ultra program in 1953. And when I was younger, I had operations where I went under general anesthetic. So I could be one of those children who was one of the guinea pigs, the early stages of implants. So I'm still not, I'm not dismissing the fact that people can be scanned in their brain, but I feel with what I experience in my brain, that for it to bounce off the ionosphere when I'm up in the North Cape without some receptor in my brain, I think I would be absolutely blown apart if I didn't have some receptor which was monitored very, very carefully. So one day we will find out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I wanted to touch just briefly on the program in the United States, and we can't be absolutely certain that it's run similarly in other countries, but we do have a diagram on our homepage that's we just call it the targeted individual diagram, and it's and there's a flow chart that goes with it that shows the various government agencies and how they technically get their funding from the CIA. And you may have seen this diagram on our homepage.
It's excellent. I have.
And so we try to show the relationship between the Council on Foreign Relations and the CIA and the various directorates, the Department of Justice, where the FBI reports, the Defense Intelligence Agency. So these funds and all those classified orders are dispersed through 17 different intelligence agencies. And DARPA does research on implants, and the U.S. Space Force, previously the Air Force Space Command, is the one that is funded to mature and develop these microwave beam weapons from space, and to utilize and exploit the capabilities of these panel antennas in cell towers. So we recently, in our newsletter, identified the names for these people that work at the FBI and the DHS and the fusion centers. They're called targeting officers. And these targeting officers are the ones who select innocent civilians and place them on the terrorist screening database. Yeah. And we've provided through the lawsuit led by Anna Toledo, we've tried to detail how these categories, category 3 and 4, are the non-investigative subjects. These are the people that are nominated by these targeting officers. And these guys have full-time jobs. They show up to work every day and look for any excuse, and maybe I'm overplaying it, but they look for people to say, oh, here's a potential whistleblower, political activist, a scientist that won't go along with climate change, and we're just going to place them. We're going to recommend them for placement on this list. And this list is the vetting. The vetting is non-existent. It's 99% of the nominations are accepted.
Yeah.
So there's very little vetting, very little check to see if this person could actually be called a terrorist. It's simply a corrupt system of a secret blacklist. And I think our attorney, Anna Toledo, has made an outstanding summary in a number of videos trying to drive that point home.
She has. She's been brilliant. As you were speaking, I have in front of me here on my wall, I used to do some volunteer work for Amnesty International. And to your point, I have a picture of this child from Africa. I don't know whether you can see it. And it says different shouldn't mean death. And I agree with you. Who determines that we should be anyone who is different in whatever grade, your sexuality, your color, what you eat at nighttime, what groups you hang out with, what religion you are? Who can really determine what is the correct society? And it's outrageous. The soulless people who use us. What's happening in the United States with the Second Amendment, where you now have children going in and shooting children in schools. You don't have any protection for them. And the Second Amendment was written for the militia to protect the United States people. It was not written for people to go and have high-powered machine guns. What's happening in the United States now, and to your point with this graph that you show with the different departments, it doesn't surprise me that we have a vet who has been used as part of this technology, going in and shooting up a military base and killing people if he's hearing voices or she's hearing voices. And we hear this all too often in the United States. We don't have that problem now. We might have certain gangs in Australia for territory, but we have a situation where you cannot have a gun in Australia. But you look at the United States and what people are doing over the last 100 years with communication and the understanding of what the Second Amendment states about guns. Why is that developed? Why are we at that point? Why don't people open up and talk about this more? It's stunning. It's stunning to me. Being brought up in Australia, having lived in the United States, and now sitting on the outside looking at what's going on in the United States, it doesn't surprise me that you're going to have some people who are affected by a microwave, who are so exhausted from it, going in and doing this to bases. I don't have a bone in my body where I can consider ever doing that. I'm trying to protect future generations and the TIs who are suffering now. But I understand why this is happening in the United States.
It's a very difficult subject here in the United States. There's a lot of deliberate manipulation of issues and agendas. Excuse me, they're giving me a little difficulty with my throat. The Second Amendment issues are highly charged, and that's been going on for many years. But I don't know that we have an easy solution to that, Craig.
Yeah. Richard, thank you so much for being with us today and bringing your wonderful intellect into our discussion. It's overwhelming. We have this situation around the world, and we will just keep fighting as best we can. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to make, Richard?
Yes, I do. Thanks, Craig. I wanted to mention that Targeted Justice we are planning, still in the planning stages, a rally in New Orleans. We have a registration for that, and we encourage folks from all over the United States and certainly outside of the United States to register at tievents.org. There's a registration page. You can sign up, and we're going to try to coordinate through there. We're going to release information on where we're going to meet, and we're going to try to coordinate at least some of the meals and coordinate a rally that everybody can get involved with. And we certainly want to see folks from outside of the United States. That's the first thing I want to mention. And I want to mention TI Day coming up. So here in Houston, we're planning on doing some flyers and handouts in the big park. There's a big park here called Memorial Park, and lots of joggers and walkers on Saturdays. And again, we're doing a special presentation that was put together by a number of our team members for Tuesday night. We're going to broadcast that, and it's going to be kind of a fun show. And people are going to get to meet some of the volunteers and some of the people that work behind the scenes. And I think that's going to be very enjoyable for everybody on TI Day on the following Tuesday. So we want everybody to stay tuned and watch for that.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks very much. Finally, I'd like to thank everybody for listening in today. As I mentioned, I am a board member of Ecotour based in Brussels, Belgium. The website that we have is www.icator.be, and we will talk about Ecotour's development and what we're trying to do in future sessions. Finally, I just want to say a few words. We must stop any organization using these weapons now and in the future. Again, it's a precious privilege to be here on Earth, and future generations will suffer deliberately and disastrously if we are not told by a whistleblower the way that victims have been inserted with chips, implants, or how the scanning continues to be operated and how we can get rid of them, and who is associated with using these technologies on so many innocent people. We must do that now, and for our children's children in the future. Thank you for being here today, and we would look forward to sharing our experiences with you in the future.
Thank you, Craig.
Thanks, Richard.